There are moments in a man's life when he looks around and realizes he's walking alone. No applause, no backup, no circle of friends to lean on. And while that reality can feel heavy, it can also become the most powerful turning point of his life. Because a man with no friends is not weak. He is unshaped potential, waiting to turn solitude into strength, silence into strategy, and loneliness into leadership. Solitude is often misunderstood. People assume that being alone means being unwanted or unvalued, but in reality, solitude is the one environment where a man can finally confront the truth about himself without interference, noise, or influence. When a man walks through life with no friends, he is forced into a level of self-awareness that most people never reach. He must sit with his thoughts, his fears, his insecurities, his dreams, and his deepest questions. And instead of running from those thoughts, he learns to navigate them, shape them, and eventually master them. This is where identity begins. Not in crowds, not in conversations, not in social circles. Identity is formed in the quiet moments when a man begins to understand who he really is. When there are no friends pulling him in different directions, no opinions weighing him down, no group expecting him to conform, a man gains something incredibly rare: internal clarity. He begins to recognize the difference between what he actually wants and what the world has told him he should want. He becomes aware of habits that no longer serve him, beliefs that limit him, and dreams that he had buried under the pressure of trying to be accepted. Solitude forces a man to ask himself hard questions. What do I stand for? What kind of life do I want to build? Who am I when no one is watching? These questions shape him more deeply than any friendship ever could. A man with no friends learns to trust his own voice. He stops relying on other people to validate his decisions. He stops doubting his instincts. He stops needing approval before taking action. He gains confidence not from external praise, but from internal alignment. This kind of self-trust is powerful because it gives him the freedom to build a life based on authenticity instead of expectation. He becomes the kind of man who makes choices consciously, intentionally, and boldly. And once a man becomes grounded in who he is, no one can easily sway or manipulate him. He becomes independent, emotionally strong, and mentally sharp. Solitude also becomes a kind of mirror. It reflects back the parts of a man he needs to refine, his weaknesses, his patterns, his emotional triggers. While others hide behind crowds, friendships, and distractions, a man with no friends has the opportunity to work on himself at a depth most people will never understand. He learns discipline because there is no one else to push him. He learns accountability because there is no one else to blame. He learns emotional control because there is no one to rescue him when he spirals. Through this process, he develops an inner strength that becomes unbreakable. He stops seeking escape from discomfort and starts using discomfort to grow. And eventually, he reaches a point where solitude no longer feels empty. It feels empowering. He feels comfortable in his own company. He feels proud of the man he is becoming. He begins to understand that being alone was never a sign of weakness. It was preparation. Preparation to stand tall. Preparation to rediscover himself. Preparation to build a foundation so solid that no betrayal, abandonment, or loneliness can shake him again. When a man finally learns who he is in solitude, he becomes a force. He becomes someone with a defined purpose, a clear direction, and a strong identity. And the most ironic part is that once he truly knows himself, he begins to attract the right people, individuals who match his energy, respect his boundaries, and appreciate his growth. But even then, he knows he no longer depends on anyone to feel complete, because identity built in solitude is the strongest identity a man can ever have. Isolation has a way of shaping a man that nothing else can. When a man walks through life without friends, without a support system, without people who check in or lift him up, he is pushed into a different level of mental training. It's not the kind taught in books or classrooms. It's the kind forged in silence, setbacks, and relentless self-reliance. In isolation, a man learns that if he wants progress, he must create it. If he wants change, he must initiate it. If he wants strength, he must build it with his own hands. And that pressure, instead of breaking him, begins to mold him into someone who can survive storms that would destroy others. A man with no friends learns to stop depending on encouragement to move forward. He realizes that waiting for approval is a cage that keeps him limited. With no one cheering him on, he becomes his own motivator. He learns to push himself, even when he's tired, even when he's discouraged, even when the world feels heavy. This type of self-driven discipline is rare, and it becomes one of his greatest weapons. While others rely on praise to feel worthy or productive, he learns to act because it's necessary, not because someone is watching. That shift transforms him into a man who can keep going long after others quit. In isolation, He also develops emotional toughness. When life hits him hard, he doesn't have the luxury of leaning on someone for comfort. He must learn to calm his own anxiety, regulate his own emotions, and rebuild himself after every collapse. He becomes familiar with failure, disappointment, and rejection, but instead of letting these experiences define him, he uses them to sharpen his mind. He begins to understand that pain isn't something to avoid. It's something to grow through. Each setback teaches him resilience. Each disappointment strengthens his emotional armor. Each lonely night becomes a reminder that he's still standing, still breathing, still capable of rising again. This mental toughness becomes obvious in the way he carries himself. He no longer gets shaken easily. He doesn't panic over small setbacks. He doesn't crumble under pressure. People who haven't walked alone don't understand why he's so steady, why he's so composed, why challenges don't break him. But he knows. He's been through situations where he had no one to call, no one to help, no one to guide him. He survived those moments on his own, and now the world's noise barely touches him. A man who has learned to be strong without a support system becomes nearly unbreakable. Isolation also teaches him independence on a deeper level. He learns to solve problems without waiting for advice. He learns to take responsibility instead of shifting blame. He learns to trust his ability to navigate life. And with every decision he makes alone, his confidence grows. Not the loud, boastful kind, the quiet, unshakable kind that comes from knowing he has been tested and has proven himself worthy of his own trust. Eventually, something powerful happens. He realizes he no longer fears being alone. In fact, he begins to appreciate it. He sees isolation not as a punishment, but as a training ground. A place where he became mentally sharp, emotionally resilient, and incredibly focused. He recognizes that the strength he built in these silent seasons is the reason he can now handle pressure, setbacks, and challenges with calm determination. And when he finally steps back into the world, he carries a different energy, an energy of someone who cannot be easily influenced or broken. He moves with purpose. He speaks with clarity. He stands with confidence. Because he knows that if he could survive the world alone, he can conquer it with, or without anyone beside him. Isolation didn't weaken him, it toughened him into the kind of man who can endure anything. Loneliness has a way of stripping life down to its essentials. When a man finds himself with no friends, no circle to depend on, no voices to distract him, he is forced to confront the deeper questions that many people avoid their entire lives. At first, it can feel painful. The quiet feels heavy, the days feel longer, the nights feel colder. But beneath that discomfort lies a powerful transformation. Loneliness becomes the doorway to discovering purpose. It pushes a man to ask, why am I here? What am I meant to build? What impact do I want to leave behind? These questions do not arise when life is full of noise and people. They surface when a man is alone with his thoughts and has no choice but to face himself. In these moments, he starts recognizing that his loneliness isn't a sign that he's broken or unworthy. It's a sign that life is preparing him for something greater. When people disappear, when support fades, when friends walk away, it often means the next phase of growth requires a different version of him. One they were not meant to witness. Purpose rarely reveals itself in crowded rooms. It reveals itself in the silence that forces a man to listen inward. And as he begins to reflect, patterns emerge. He notices desires that have been buried, talents he has ignored, dreams he once abandoned because he was too distracted trying to fit in or too busy chasing acceptance. A man with no friends gains the priceless opportunity to build his life intentionally. Instead of living to impress, he begins living to express. Instead of living to be included, he begins living to be fulfilled. With fewer distractions, he can focus on his growth with intensity, his health, his mind, his craft, his goals, and his vision. The time others spend socializing, he spends improving. The energy others waste seeking validation, he channels into building a foundation strong enough to support his future. And slowly, loneliness turns into productivity, pain turns into progress, emptiness turns into direction. Purpose is not something that simply appears. It is carved out through deep reflection and deliberate action. A man with no friends has more space to think, more room to experiment, more freedom to rebuild himself. He begins to understand that everything he went through was shaping him. Every person who left made space for his evolution. Every silent season prepared him for the moment where he could step into a higher version of himself without being held back by the expectations of others. And as his purpose becomes clearer, his energy shifts. He begins to walk differently, think differently, and act differently. He becomes more decisive because he finally knows where he's headed. He becomes more confident because his actions align with his values. He becomes more focused because he no longer entertains what drains him. And ironically, once he steps into this new level of purpose, the right people naturally begin to show up. Not people who distract him, but people who elevate him. Not friends who require him to shrink, but allies who encourage him to expand. Not company that fills time, but company that adds value. But here's the most powerful part: he no longer needs them. He welcomes them, but he doesn't depend on them. Because loneliness taught him how to stand. Purpose taught him how to move. The journey taught him who he is. A man who finds his purpose in solitude becomes unstoppable. He no longer fears being alone because he understands that every season of loneliness is simply preparing him for his next level. He walks forward not searching for belonging, but carrying a mission that makes belonging irrelevant. Loneliness didn't break him. It awakened him. It didn't weaken him. It directed him. It didn't isolate him. It molded him into a man who no longer wanders through life, but moves with intention, vision, and a purpose powerful enough to change his entire future.